Now, I'd like to invite onto the stage for the next session, which is all about taking tech trends and taking tech into the marketplace sustainably. The chair of this session is Yousef, the CEO of LG Sonic and fellow water innovator. Yvette, who's investment director at Capricorn Partners. Julia Reinaud, who's a senior director of Breakthrough Energy, and Kirsten Dunlop. Yousef is joining us online, the CEO of EIC Climate-KIC. Yousef, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Yousef, and for the people here asking why my name is Yousef, ask my parents. They will tell you they find it funny. So, since everyone is laughing, maybe they are right about it. So, welcome to this session. I have a very interesting panel over here, and today we are going to try to figure out why is it hard to scale up sustainable businesses. And why do we need to scale? Because without scaling, we will have zero impact. So everyone can start a business. But if we would like to solve the climate challenges, if we would like to create more economy in Europe, then we need to scale the businesses. And I do have with me, please introduce yourself, Yvette, Julia, and Kirsten online. Please, Yvette.
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Yvette Go. I am from venture capital. Maybe a little bit about my background. I heard a lot about women in STEM, so I'm a chemical engineer by background. I spent 10 years in the chemical industry, and 15 years ago I moved into venture capital. Spent most of those 15 years in venture capital firms, and part of it actually at the European Investment Fund as head of social and environmental impact. Today, I represent a venture capital firm, Capricorn Partners, and I manage a fund that's called a Sustainable Chemistry Fund. So we'll talk more about that when we get into what are kind of challenges that we come across.
So we have a VC on the table. That's good. Julia, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Julia Reinaud. I am French-Australian, married to an Italian, and what you could say probably a citizen of the world. So I've been working for over 20 years in the energy and climate space, and I've had many roles, including advising governments when I was at the International Energy Agency, having very much more of a philanthropic play where I spent 10 years in climate foundations, and for the past 5 years I've been with Breakthrough Energy, which I'm excited to tell you about.
Exciting to have you with us. And Kirsten online, can you hear us? 1 second, we can't hear you yet.
Now?
Now we can hear you. Please.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Yousef. My name is Kirsten Dunlop. I am the CEO of EIC Climate-KIC, and I have been with Climate-KIC for the last 6 years. I have a background, I'm an innovation practitioner and have been most of my life, working particularly within large corporate systems in financial services, in finance, in banking and insurance as an entrepreneur, helping to transform core business models, or working within the educational system or the leadership and board decision-making system on strategic innovation, how to think about transforming businesses in the face of very non-linear uncertainty and change in the world. So a lot of my work and my history has really been about existing successful businesses learning to transform themselves. And the work of the last 6 years with the privilege to lead one of the EIT KICs has been looking at how to take a lot of those experiences and the power of the KIC communities in the way in which they think bring together innovation, entrepreneurship and education all fused together, how to achieve transformation for whole places, for cities, for countries, for regions in complex, very complex transformations that we need for climate. And I am British Australian and managed to an Italian, so that's an interesting meeting of worlds.
We have a very international panel over here. Yvette, if I will go first to you and I will ask you, in your opinion, why is it hard to scale up a green business?
Why is it hard to read? Well, I think the one thing, and I think it was also one of the questions that you asked, is, you know, what is needed to scale up? And I think the thing is we shouldn't see technology in isolation. So it takes a lot of collaboration with on the one hand, the government and policymakers. It takes collaboration within private sector, investors and corporates as well. And of course, it takes all the innovators and the public at large and a lot of the technology companies, and it all has to come together. And that's one thing. The other part of it is also that you need to integrate it into existing value chains. And so that's actually why it's very difficult. This is one thing that we at Capricorn Partners do, is that we actually help small companies or innovative companies integrate in existing value chains. And sometimes it requires bigger changes, like the recreation of value chains, and it takes behavioral changes or policy changes. So a lot of that, especially when you want to become transformative, comes together.
So that's quite complicated. So what you are saying, to scale up the business, what you will need, there's a lot of cooperation between different shareholders, and also regulation is part of it. Julia, from your experience, what do you think about that?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think we're trying to solve for some major challenges, and the commissioner said it well a few moments ago. I think what we're focusing on at Breakthrough is very much on the climate impact. And so everything we do starts from the technology and from the science perspective. So how can we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and then thinking about what are the solutions that we're trying to solve for in different sectors. So we focus on all of the 5 sectors in the economy, and much like you're pointing to around the big challenge is that we're looking at climate from the perspective of deep tech. So what you need is patient capital, you need tailored solutions, you need to make sure that the right regulatory environment is there, as well as the financial mechanisms. And then I think, I'm sure Kirsten will talk about this, very much of the ecosystem to be around. What we've been doing at Breakthrough, which is an initiative that was set up by Bill Gates in 2015 at the COP, we've been tailoring, if you will, our programs and our initiatives very much to the needs of, if you take an entrepreneur, if you take a researcher, what needs to happen at each stage of that development. So we have a program called Fellows, which provides grants to researchers, matches them with business mentors to think about their commercialization strategy. We've got 2 cohorts, 63 fellows. Many of them are in Europe as well as in the US. That's our first program. The second is venture fund. You need to make sure that you have patient capital and that you find venture funds that understand the business on the technology as well, not just the business, but also the technology. So we've got a venture fund that has 105 portfolio companies, and we have a partnership with the European Commission and the EIB, which is focusing also on European companies particularly. And then last but not least, we have a program called Catalyst, which is tailoring to the needs of the first commercial scale projects. You need to make sure that you de-risk these projects, and it's by providing a blended of finance. And just to conclude in terms of what we're doing, in my team, we focus on the policy aspects. We focus on philanthropic initiatives that can help unlock demand, because often these technologies come with the premium. And then we focus on supporting the ecosystem. So we've been supporting, for example, EIT and O-Energy to build a hydrogen accelerator. So there's not one solution, as Yvette was saying, but many.
Thank you. If you are talking about the ecosystem, I think Climate-KIC has a lot of experience. More than 4,500 startups you have helped in the last couple of years. Kirsten, what is your take from the ecosystem idea?
Well, I would, excuse me, very much echo the points that both Julia and Yvette have made. From our perspective, for example, spearheading the European mission, the Horizon Europe mission, to decarbonize 112 cities by 2030, you're working back, if you like, ground truthing what it is that we need transformative, scalable solutions to tackle. And immediately then the ecosystem becomes a very, very real challenge of not just how to connect individual ideas or idea and knowledge transfer, but how to actually integrate different solutions into parts of a much bigger puzzle and ensure that they are able to act together, that they are able to form and reform new value chains, new economic models, new business models, and new composites together, and that they are able to connect and integrate into a context of fast-moving regulatory and policy change that is in line and in pace with what's needed. And this is where some of the really biggest challenges sit. Because when we say that our assumption is that in order to solve for climate, what we need is technologies and businesses to scale, in reality, that doesn't necessarily help us. It depends how we define what scaling is. Sometimes it's scaling across. Sometimes it's being capable of scaling down. Sometimes it is being capable of scaling up. but only when connected to other solutions. So for example, there's no point in us trying to solve for climate by substituting all forms of energy for mobility if we don't change the infrastructure, underlying infrastructure, and the patterns of mobility demand, and move to a much more complex, multimodal way of thinking about how we move around in the world. We don't have enough land to simply have everybody own 2 cars, even if they are running on electric. So then you have to pull in not just the solutions around electrification mobility and micro-mobility and how that works, but then you've got to engage with the question of how do you decarbonize houses, spatial planning, how do you think about distributed grids, how do you reconnect in home generation into electricity, and then how do you think about alternative forms of energy for, say, if electricity is the core of a city and hydrogen is a regional solution, then how do you make sure they're fully integrated and anticipate the unintended consequences of things like hydrogen leakage? So straight away, when you're talking about scaling up businesses to have the transformative effects we need, you need very, very systemic thinking, systemic approaches in the design of businesses, every single individual business, in the deployment of businesses together, and in the way in which they connect to one another. Our learning is that you need to embed those businesses very, very quickly into a context of policy labs and regulatory sandboxes so that you can quickly work out where will existing legislation in cities, for example, I've just come from the city of Amsterdam's Green Light District, where there's a whole set of unrelated regulations stopping the scaling of massive decarbonization of traditional historical housing stock. And you need, very much to Julia's point, to prepare the ground and the capability for working with a blended finance model, because simply scaling in capital markets doesn't solve the real economy challenge of connecting demand finance, procurement, blended capital stacks, patient, slow release capital that can begin to come in and support different business models to come together. And then last of all, from my experience, and certainly in the work we're doing with cities and with regions and thinking about the tensions in the rural-urban divide, you need businesses to be able to capture imagination. It is important that there is a scientific basis, that the things that we are putting into the market actually achieve the carbon impacts, the emissions reductions that we need, and the environmental restoration. But we ultimately will not and do not see behavioral change, market change, economic model change, unless we get an anecdotal capture of what it is that these businesses offer to the world and offer to a sense of living well and living in a way that is enjoyable, that is healthy, that is enduring for the long term. That is an essential part of the capability building we need to do if we really want to scale across hundreds and thousands of cities and regions.
Thank you. That's quite complicated to say. Like, if you would like to help scaling, I do understand. We need all the shareholders. We need to change the regulation. We need to change the whole world. But we have here entrepreneurs, which are every day waking up to run their company. They believe in their technology. They believe in their team. But still, they are facing some big objection to scale their business. So, Yvette, if I will go to you, and from your own organization, what do you do to support the entrepreneurs to scale? Because we are in the EIC Summit, and the EIC Summit is about the innovators, is about scaling the businesses. And over here, I do think more than the half of the people over here, they own a company, they are running a company, or they are in the management team of a company. So what is your organization doing in this green transition?
Yes, and I'll take that because one is the organization, the other is what you do as a person, because at some point I think that's probably where we want to take it as well, what you can do as a person. So Capricorn Partners, they were a venture capital investor, and around the technologies that have a sustainable chemistry angle, which is food, feed, agro, it is novel materials, it's also circularity, circular economy, regenerating waste, and then when we get into trends I'll have some nice examples there. Generating waste and seeing that actually also as a raw material rather than just as a waste. Those are the kind of things that we invest in. It's a typical venture fund, so that does mean we have a sort of typical classical fund of 10 years, and that means that is a certain stage, early growth stage of companies that we would take. Now, as a person, I actually think what is interesting is that there are also the policy measures. What I did not mention yet is I'm also an EIC jury member for the accelerator. And that's actually where you can also make a personal difference, is where you actually say, okay, yes, you bring this knowledge from a venture capital perspective. The EIC has, particularly on the equity side, a requirement that venture capitalists or a private sector investor becomes a lead investor alongside the European Commission, and has very good reasons for that. And because of that, it's very important that there is an alignment and an attunement. We had in the last couple of days, I don't know if not everybody might know, but there's here quite a few of the jury members, and yes, it is a pleasure to meet them in the for me, it was the first time to meet them in person. And I think it's great that we actually work together. And I know there's another initiative where there's a great, and I'll leave that to Julia to mention it, because she's the initiative taker of it, where actually I think there should be much more integration of some of these players in the market. So actually, to your ventures, if you apply to the EIC Accelerator, that's where you meet, that's certain forms of funding. So there's a grant part, there is also an equity part, but also speaking with other sort of venture capitalists. And it is also our obligation as persons to bring those together and actually make sure that all these different factors are not working in isolation, but they actually collaborate.
Yeah, thank you. Julia, tell us about the initiative.
Tell us about
the initiative.
Of course, so, okay, I can tell you about the initiative. So we've been, throughout the ecosystem that we have, you know, we're 150 people, and we have a number of partners, which is quite incredible. We had our first summit where we had, I think, over 800 people that were there, from investors to philanthropists to innovative companies to our fellows to our partners, many others. And I think a lot of what we're observing is sometimes the story isn't well told as to what is the solution that you're bringing to the table and how it can help solve a challenge. And here what we've been trying to do, to an initiative then that Capricorn and Yvette are a part of, is raising the voice of this next generation of technologies. So with the help of the Clean Tech Group, what we created is something called Clean Tech for Europe, which is essentially looking at elevating that voice and bridging the gaps of dialogues between the clean tech community, venture funds, scale-up companies, and many others with the policymaking community. So just speaking to Clean Tech for Europe, what we've done at the European level, we have the Clean Tech for Europe VC Coalition, 22 VCs that are from across Europe. They represent more than 400 portfolio companies, the likes of some of them that might be here today, and with the idea of showing what is the next generation of technologies, making sure then that that is transcribed into policymaking and into new rules, new regulations, new financial instruments. We have also associated to that a scale-up coalition, because I think perhaps exactly to what you've been saying, Yousef, there is a challenge. Companies that have raised 10, 50 to 200 million euros are not the same if you're a large company that's transiting. And so there are challenges that are very particular to these companies that are in the midst of their fundraising efforts, that are wanting to industrialize, but not yet, for example, have the performance guarantees on the balance sheet that they could have. And then the third group that we have under Clean Tech for Europe is the Friends of Clean Tech in the European Parliament, because again, it's important that policymakers have a sense of what is the next generation of technologies. And just to say also, we didn't stop it to Brussels, right? We didn't think Europe is important, Brussels is important, but last week we launched Clean Tech for Baltics. A month ago we launched Clean Tech for Nordics with the 5 Nordic countries. We have Clean Tech for France, we've got Tech for Net Zero in Germany, and the journey is still only at its beginning. Really important to have more visibility for what these technologies are, because at the end of the day, it's regulation that's going to define what the market size is, what the premiums can be or how they can be overcome through different policy instruments, and also what type of financing will be available that's tailored to the needs of these companies. So among other things, just saying that we're very glad that Capricorn and many others have joined the adventure, because again, having a structured voice is very important to making a difference.
Thank you. That's very impressive. And for the entrepreneurs over here, is Clean Tech Europe. Is there a website they can go and
Absolutely.
Look?
And it's Clean Tech for Europe, not to be mistaken with Clean Tech Europe that was announced last week by Commissioner Breton. But hopefully, we know that in any case, we're very engaged together.
That's clear. So from Climate-KIC, Kirsten, can you give us an example, a good example of a technology which was able to scale to a size which really matters?
Well, let me start by answering actually the question of what we do. So that might help explain a little bit, because as an organization, our focus is on market building. So we incubate, we help grow companies from very, very early pre-seed, seed. And we work to educate and provide grant services to support the incubation acceleration, but then to educate, and particularly educate and prepare entrepreneurs for dealing in a context where transformation is the job at hand. And therefore dealing not only with the question of capital markets, but the question of the real economy demand for growing a business organically in a European context or in a global context, and some of the challenges that come with that, the need to understand offtake agreements, demand side and supply side finance coming together and so on. We do a lot of work as an organization to connect businesses to other businesses within the context of place-based portfolios or value chain-based portfolios. And I'll give an example in a minute to come to your specific question, Yousef. And we are connecting constantly the innovation to policy experience. So where do entrepreneurs need help to try and unlock on a regulatory or policy barriers? And then the financial mobilization, so that as we pull through on the accelerators, we then connect through to funds. And in fact, at the moment, we're in the process of setting up a fund to specifically address this challenge in European solutions for late-stage venture and early-stage growth, and where we see a massive opportunity with European solutions that have a global application. So the market building, for example, we are working, let me give you an example of working on what we are called deep demonstrations, which is a partnership in this instance with the Government of Ireland, taking Irish agriculture economy and land use to sustainable bioeconomy. And what that means is, from a market building context, if you are then an entrepreneur, take something like a fantastic startup called Crop Intellect, which is using a technology called R-Leaf that enables extracting N2O fertilizer, so using nitrogen to create plant-based food in a much more sustainable way. Or, for example, alternative proteins like insects on a really important scale-up that's come with early-stage Climate-KIC support, that is looking at how do you replace the entire value chains for the food that we feed to fish and to other sources of food for human consumption. The market-building piece is to create a structured environment within, say, a national context like Ireland, for these businesses to scale out right across and replace and embed in existing value chains in an area where agricultural industry is particularly high emissions contributing, and then create that kind of growth economics for really sustainable alternatives. And that means working with others. So a lot of the work that we are doing is really looking to help entrepreneurs work out how to collaborate with different streams of finance, with different market providers, with different even competitors, to work together to form much more composite, scalable solutions.
Thank you. Yvette, if you will go here with the action, what is the action you would like to give the people, the innovators, the organization, the VCs, but also the European Commission, the EIC? So what do we need to do?
Well, if there would be a call to action, it would be to get out of your silos and go beyond those borders. I mean, we all have the world that we know. We have our, often we also have vested interests. But maybe we should actually go outside of those barriers and go and find, because we all have pieces of the puzzle. There's one actually thing I did want to say, and because I know this is one of the last questions, is actually, a lot of it is about timing, but how do you create the right timing? And sometimes it's actually not so bad to have a crisis. There's nothing like a good crisis to actually accelerate development. And maybe this is because of that. It's a great timing right now. So look beyond the barriers that you know and speak with, like I said, as a policymaker, with the corporate sector, with the investors, with the ventures. And I know we're doing a lot of that, but I think we can do that more, because that's the call to action would be get out of your silo and actually look at the world maybe from the other perspective and find the pieces of the puzzle, because maybe somebody else is holding that piece of the puzzle that you need.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Julia, what will your call to action be?
Well, I think just building on what Yvette says, we are at a time of war in Ukraine, and I think it's important to remind ourselves what has happened over the last months, particularly looking at the energy transition. Since February, Europe has gone from importing 40% of its natural gas from Russia to now less than 7%. So I think the first sort of call to action is it's a can-do, and now's the time. If you think of the 1970 oil crisis, that's really what spearheaded the first starting of solar and wind. So now looking at, okay, well, using, as you're saying, how do you not waste a crisis? What are the next generation of technologies that we need? long-duration energy storage, more innovative grid technologies, electrification. We need more clean hydrogen, green hydrogen, adapting, innovating on the use cases. And all of this is what we're seeing. So many new portfolio companies in the BEV portfolio, but also elsewhere, understanding what are the technologies they're solving for. I think building on the fact that we're now in a time of an energy security crisis and the response of Europe to the Inflation Reduction Act is thinking more and more about how do we make the climate conversation relevant to the energy security conversation. Because if you think of a lot of the solutions that are being developed related to energy, they're also addressing that crisis, taking away any use of natural gas, taking away, making your buildings more efficient. So I think making ourselves relevant, and as I said, making ourselves visible. And I think one thing that's also very important is we're thinking about, okay, how is Europe addressing now, or how is the European Commission, you ask, going to address its response to the Inflation Reduction Act? The coalition of scale-ups that I mentioned earlier came out with a letter last week, and it says 3 things. We need speed, we need scale, and we need simplicity. And in all through the pillars that we're looking at in terms of mobilizing finance, in terms of creating a demand shock, in terms of unlocking regulation, permitting, and in terms of making the infrastructure available, now's the time. So I very much agree with Yvette. We need a call to action and see what we can do together.
Thank you. Thank you. Christine, we heard simple, what was it?
Speed, scale, and simplicity.
Simple.
Speed, scale, and simplicity.
Yes.
And maybe to add a 4th, which I'm sure Kirsten will mention as well, systemic as well is probably something that I would add, so that it's integrated into the system. But
okay.
Over to you.
Systemic. So,
Thank
Kirsten.
you, Julia. That's exactly what I would have added. So, okay, speed, scale, simplicity when it comes to the regulatory environment and the policy environment, particularly coherence. Where you have policies pushing in opposite directions, it's disastrous. And we have a few of those instances. And systemic, and I would really add the call to action now very much in a context of what I would call polycrisis. If you look at the energy crisis, it's not a demand crisis, it's a supply crisis. And this is the time to really invest. We have solutions, we haven't managed to integrate them. It's an absolutely golden opportunity to push in hard and invest in the fact that we do not have sufficient resources, and we need to start getting a lot smarter on the way we integrate and combine. And really that means the call to action, to build on Yvette's comment, is not just get out of silos, but learn how to do radical collaboration. Stop, really think beyond the 19th century industrial revolution, competitive construct, competition law, and start moving into a next generation of designing for multi-sided business models and deep collaboration across sectors, deep collaboration across structures, so that we work out how to pull some of these things in further forward as quickly as possible. That really means that timing is absolutely essential, and now is the best possible time to push as quickly as possible, but also to think about being fit for the future. And I would particularly be calling strongly out as a core partner of the EIC, anticipating the fact that taking a holistic systemic view does mean thinking about, does your business really contribute to solving for emissions reduction, flexibility, adaptation, and resilience? Because if it looks like a fantastic business, but it doesn't solve for those problems that become absolutely overarching and dominant for everything, then it isn't a scalable business for the future. It's a business that's for the now, and we need a future in which every single thing we do contributes to solving these problems.
Thank you, Kirsten. So my call to action is for the all entrepreneurs over here. I do know how hard it is to scale up a business. I do know how many nights we are not sleeping because we are just sweating about the next day, about raising money, hiring people, firing people, production problems, certification, regulation. So I do know it's really hard to scale up the businesses. And for that, my call to action is don't give up, because the timing is perfect. Financially, timing is perfect. According to McKinsey study, $9.2 trillion is going to be invested for zero-net technologies. But also the timing is really good because we don't have any time to lose anymore. And we need the entrepreneurs to save the planet. So for that, I would like to thank you all three. Thank you very much, and thank you for you all.
Thank you. And everyone, congratulations for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done, panelists, and well done, Yousef. I can tell you, I know some of his scars and his war stories. We'll, over a cocktail tonight, I'm sure you'll tell some of them.
Sure.
But it's a mindset as well that you talked about. And I'm going to steal this phrase, but I've heard the phrase "stub," which is now flowing into that particular sector. That's the topic of our next session, financing deep tech innovation. And we're going to start here in just over 20 minutes' time. So have a good break, and we'll see you here in 20 minutes. Thank you.